So if we're going to play black in a Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation, the Karlsbad structure, and white tries a minority attack, what do we think black should do? Well, one of the things that black can do is ignore it. What's the worst that can happen? You're going to get a weak pawn on c6. And while white's spending time arranging that, what can we do? Well, we might have a little go at trying to do something on the other side of the board. Maybe not a little something, maybe a big something. We can play knight to e4, cementing our knight on the furthest point on the half-open file, and hope that white won't dare play f3 because there'll be a weak pawn on e6, e3. So we'll put our knight on the available e4 spot. We'll move our rook to e8, and from there, well, obviously it supports the knight, but we can do a rook lift and maybe start threatening the white king sitting on g1. So that's a possibility. You remember in the last games that we've seen, black's may well end up with a weak pawn on c6. So having a rook on the third rank, well, obviously it's defending a pawn on c6. So that's a double purpose posting of the rook there. So that's not a bad idea. This bishop on c8, we've said is a bit of a problem child in the Queen's Gambit and in so many other openings. We've seen Rossetto try and swap that off on f5. If the white queen and the white bishop are lined up on this diagonal, it's not going to be possible to do that without losing a piece. But one of the manoeuvres that black can attempt is move the rook to e8. The knight comes from b8 to d7 to f8, and that looks after the h pawn in case, as I say, of this battery. Well, then we can then move our our knight from f6 to h5. There'll then be a swap of the dark squared bishops if there are bishops on g5 and e7. The queen then comes to e7, and then with the pawn on h7 protected, we'll protect it a little bit more by moving g7, g6. The knight on f8 can then come to e6 and g7, and this is the plan that we saw adopted by Rossetto in the first game. So the result of all that, we've got a pawn on g6 and a knight on g7 protecting f4. So these two elements protecting the f5 square and our poor neglected bishop can come from c8 to f5 and swap itself off. So that's a sort of a defensive plan for black with that bishop, and so on. So we're just going to move our pieces all across to the king side and hope to create some mischief. But on the queen side, there may be some defensive measures we could adopt. We've already seen a sort of a minimum defence. Move the a pawn to a6, which will oblige whites to play a4 if they want to play b4 and b5. And when the pawn comes to b5, we'll swap it off so that we only end up with one weakness on c6 and not two weaknesses, one on the a file and one on c6 as well. So that's kind of a minimum defence, is swap off the a pawn. Another way of going about this is if whites put their pawns on a4 and b4, we'll play a6 again. And when white moves forward with b5, we can Let me make black's pawn a different colour. We'll move, we'll swap and swap so that we're left with just a white pawn on b5. And then we'll move our a pawn from a6 to a5. And the result of that is we'll have a pawn on b7, pawn on a5, which is passed. The weakness of that we get, I don't think the b7 pawn is very easy to attack. The weak pawn that you get is the one on d5, but you do have a passed a pawn and maybe an open c file. And an isolated queen pawn, not the worst thing that can happen to you in chess, certainly not if it's not on a half open file. So with the d file being closed here, that's not too bad a way to play for black. Another idea for black, in combination perhaps with some of the other ideas that we've seen, when the b pawn gets as far as b5, actually you can just push past with c5, and then you do get an isolated queen pawn on a half open file. But again, not the worst thing that you can have in life. You might prefer to have a weak pawn that's giving you some space rather than a weak pawn that's just sitting there sopping up defensive resources. Another idea here for black is when white plays a4 and b4, we may be able to play b5, sorry, play a6 and b5 by black. Let me make those pawns blue. You might be able to see them a little bit more clearly. And you think, well, my goodness me, that's kind of a we've given white this weakness on c6 for free. But I think the idea is that we're going to play this structure and through one maneuver or another, knight to e4 to d6 to c4, and then the knight shelters the pawn that's backward on the open file. A bit like the Pillsbury formation, that we've got a very strong advanced knight that can't be chased away, and it shelters the pawn. You might, it may be that it's the other knight that ends up on c5, either through this route or just get rid of some arrows. The knight sometimes comes round to c7, to e8, and then to c4. So there's some blockading plans there for black. Another plan that I have seen work, even against the mighty Keith article, is just say if your white hasn't really got around to doing anything yet, is just treat the a pawn as a battering ram. Just try and say, well, the weakest pawns on the queen side might be these two. Let's shake them up. And if black can create a bit of aggro down there for white, that might also be another plan. That's hard to get away with. It's an unusual plan, but it's certainly another possibility. So all sorts of cheerful ideas for black there. Let's have a look at a few in practice. I saw in an article by Nigel Davis in Chess Magazine a while ago, this rook lift, black putting the one of their rooks, usually put on the e file, but lifting the rook to the third rank and parking it across on the king side, where in anticipation of a weak pawn on c6 arriving, it's defending it, but also obviously a very attacking piece on the king side. Just a general feeling that black might be able to attack on the king side. Again, with Petrosian on the black side of things, here's a very widely quoted game. Notice this black knight on c6, that's on d6. Sorry, I can't get my worms out today. Not worms, words. See this knight on d6 that's looking at these critical squares. White has been a bit slow about getting on with the minority attack in this position, and white, having been slow, may be vulnerable to some kingside aggro. And so here is black thinking very seriously about what what we can do to white on the king side. So the initiative there very quickly passed to black, and there was no hint of a weakness of on the queen side. White really didn't get time, and it's been all been about black's successful king side attack. The best example I've ever seen of this, which I was reminded of by a video by Matthew Sadler and Natasha Regan, analysing some top computer games. It was an analysis by Sari Tartakova, the wittiest chess player that's ever lived, who composed a piece of analysis as part of the Karlsbad variation. The Karlsbad, I've not explained this yet, have I? The Karlsbad structure is so called because Rudolf Spielmann played it a few times and with an idea of getting a kingside attack, not a queenside attack or a minority attack, but a kingside attack at a tournament in Karlsbad in 1929. And Alekin, having played this Swiss defence against the Queen's Gambit a few times against Capablanca, people started playing this Karlsbad idea against the Swiss defence, and in that form it's known as the Karlsbad variation. So this is the true Karlsbad variation, and Tartakova came up with this amazing analysis just to say, well, let's see if we can put the boot in on the king side, starting with the G pawn, and not all of these moves are forced, but I think the theme is clear enough. And what black just moves all their pieces across to the king side as fast as they can. Excuse my throat. And eventually the pressure tells. Fantastic piece of fantasy. And again, black's got two weaknesses on the queen side, but they weren't really relevant because black's attack was faster and was powerful. In the notes, there's another game by Bent Larsen against Svetozar Gligoric, which is another nice example of attacking play. Let's pick it up at a crucial moment here, where again white's been successful in creating a weakness on the queen side there. But which would you rather have? A weak pawn to attack on c6, or a weak king to attack on h2 with all your pieces coming across to the king side. So there's rather a nice one. Also in the notes you can find a game by Famer against Kalifman. So here's actually not a very unusual type of position, but we've oh yeah, it is a slightly unusual type of position. I picked it up a bit too late. Knight e2 here. And black came up with a very enterprising move, bishop to h3. And if white takes the bishop, queen to g5 check and checkmate. So white didn't dare take the bishop. Queen to c2, bishop takes g2, bishop to g4. And white's already facing a kingside attack, a pawn down. So this is not going well. And the game didn't last much longer at all. Also in the notes, a game with between somebody called Jacopo Casellas, pardon my pronunciation, against Antonio Antunes. And here we see in this game a familiar sort of queenside attack by white, and takes. And now we see this plan of b5, and as it happens, both knights can reach the c4 square, and there's no hint in this position of white being able to make much of that weakness on the half-open file. I mean, yes, it can be attacked by knight a5 or something, but it doesn't seem quite so important right now. And in the end game, it seemed as though white was more on the defensive than was black. There's a game in there by Tisdall against Sveshnikov. Same plan, actually. So after bishop to f8, in this position, b4 and now b5, knight b6, and knight to c4. Again, shielding that pawn on c6 with a knight maneuver to c4. A game between Matusis against Ruziali, I believe, where another one of the plans that I talked about after b5 will swap and play a5 to get a past a pawn. Maybe not too crucial, but this weakness that's on d5 is the reason you're not supposed to do this sort of thing. But that's not an easy pawn to embarrass black about, and in this game, certainly white wasn't able to manage it. A very famous game also included Lajos Portish against Gary Kasparov. Again with this knight setting on d6. How often does that happen? And a bit later on in the game, we see black setting out their stall for defence on the queen side, but attack on the king side. And in fact, it rather looked like an example of black's minority attack on the other side of the board. It's not just a king side hack, because this is an end game with the queens off, and it may well be that it's white that's got the problems because of this minority attack. This pawn on e3 is the one on a half open file that's being undermined by black's attack on the dark squares. Very nice game. And lastly, just because it was an example that I could find, we have this position. Keith Arkle setting up his favourite style of attack against Andrei Maximenko. And Maximenko, I think, had 3 strong cups of coffee and decided to shove the a-pawn towards Keith's defences. And the idea here, I think, was just to try and create some problems for white on the queen side, which is cheeky at least against the white's minority attack. Anyway, so that's black's side of the minority attack, and whoever brings more ideas and more recent ideas and more familiarity with the variations to the game is more likely to win. But it's a very rich position for all that we've had a simplification of the pawn structure. Rest of the videos, other plans for white.